There's a better way to end the room than that. That has got to be the one song that explains what Elvis was all about. When Elvis sang that song, he was sick. He was not feeling good. He was, he was not himself, so to speak. I mean, he was not doing so well. And his voice just did not give out. I mean, that song is just awesome. Awesome. There's no other way to describe it. I mean, his voice is great. You can hear he's laboring with his breathing. But, I mean, he still hits all the... Guys, if you can't breathe, I know a little bit about this because my lungs have a problem. I have lung issues. If you can't breathe, guys, you cannot hit those notes. There is no way you're going to hit those notes with breathing bad. He hit every one of those single notes. Every one. Didn't miss a single note. I mean, it was unbelievable. That song is... If anybody ever says to you, why do you think Elvis is the king? Why do you think Elvis is so great? What is great about Elvis? Explain the backstory of that song and play it. I mean, if that doesn't explain what Elvis was all about, damn it, nothing will. He sat at the piano and played that song, and at one point in the song, he says to Charlie, he wants him to kind of sing with him, You can hear him, sing with me, And Charlie kind of bails on him, which Charlie never did. But he's holding the mic, and he knows he can't sing with him. And Elvis is kind of scared because he knows that, he's afraid that, I might not be able to hit that note. And I want to hit the note for the fans. I want to close it out right, And he reaches back into Elvis's bag of, I don't know what to describe it as other than just talent, God-given talent. The man had God-given talent, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I mean it. He had God-given talent. There's only been a few people in this world that got the talent Elvis got, and I can't even to come to mind with who they are at this point, to be honest with you, because Elvis was just one of a kind. Unbelievable. Like I said, guys, that song is just the epitome of what Elvis was all about. So if you ever have some jackass come up to you and go, Elvis wasn't nothing, he was this and he was that and all this, just sit their dumb ass down at a computer, and explain to him how Elvis was feeling at that time and what was going through, in his life at that time, and play that song and say, I would like to hear any moron, goof that's out there right now sing that song the way he did under those pretenses. And there's nobody out there that can. Right. He died 6 weeks later. There is not a person alive then or now, that would have been able to do that. One thing that happened, in Elvis's life, he got better with age. A lot of people like to say, the 50s Elvis and the early 60s Elvis, had more, he was more vibrant, he was more wild, he was more crazy on stage. The 50s Elvis was the rocker, so to speak. And sure, he was young, he had energy, he moved, a lot more. But the older Elvis learned his trade. He learned his technique. He trained his voice. Elvis was a student of song. He was a student of music. And there is no one better than Elvis when it comes to what he brought to the song. Elvis made every single song he sang a show. He didn't just sing it. He felt it. It was who he was. When he sang Separate Ways, that song wasn't written for Elvis. But I've seen it in this room tonight. It was sang a couple times. And I've seen it said more than once. Every time I hear that song, I think about him and Priscilla. But that song wasn't written for him. That song was written by Red West for his wife and him. But see, Elvis got the song from Red, and he made it his own. When he sang My Way, everybody likes to think Sinatra's My Way is the greatest song of all time that Sinatra did, My Way. Frankly, when Elvis did it, I felt it. It was like he lived it. It was his song. It was his life. He was singing about himself. When he sang, My Boy, even though it was about a boy and not a girl, I almost feel like he's singing about Lisa Marie. He brought every single song he did, he made it his own. Probably of the 1,000 songs Elvis sang, a lot of them they don't credit, because he did a lot of songs. But of the 1,000 songs he sang, they were mostly covers of other people's songs. But I will tell you right now that every one of those songs was probably better that Elvis did than the original, or whoever did it afterwards. And Scott, you said you gave me a mountain. Yeah, that song right there, You Gave Me a Mountain. That was a Marty Robbins song. Marty Robbins did a hell of a job, and Elvis loved Marty Robbins. Elvis loved Marty Robbins. He loved his voice. He thought he was one of the greatest singers out there. Roy Orbison, he thought he was one of the greatest singers out there. Two of his favorite singers. But You Gave Me a Mountain, you just feel like he's singing that about his life with Priscilla. When she left him, or It's Midnight. He dedicates it to Scylla on a couple versions when he sang it in concert. The Beatles, you mentioned the Beatles. I'm reading the text in the room. Obviously the Beatles were probably, in my opinion, the greatest band of all time. There's other bands out there that did a great job, Led Zeppelin and, the Rolling Stones and groups like that. I'm a big fan of Kiss, but not because they're great singers or they had great music, but their show. I like Kiss because they did a great show. Okay? And I think everything is important in music. But yeah, there was a few Beatles songs. I think Hey Jude, he did a great job on it. And let's face it, that had a lot of meaning to the Beatles. Because Hey Jude is about Julian Lennon. That song, Hey Jude, is about Julian Lennon. And his trying to deal with the fact that his dad, had divorced his mom. And he was having a hard time dealing with that. And it was originally wrote for him. And they changed it to Jude instead of Julian because it made more sense to the song. Yeah, and you know what? That's funny you bring that up. Something and Yesterday, both great songs. I do believe that Yesterday is probably as good or better than the Beatles. I seen a quote just today, ironically, about Bob Dylan. And they asked Bob Dylan, what was the greatest accomplishment in your music career? What was one of them? What do you think was one of your greatest musical accomplishments? And he said, and I quote, Elvis covered one of my songs. That was one of my greatest accomplishments in my career. That says it all. Bob Dylan is a genius. He's a musical genius. He writes songs. You can like his singing or not like his singing, but as far as his music and what he writes, he's a genius. Plain and simple. And for him to say that about Elvis, it's unbelievable. For the Beatles to say before Elvis there was nothing, and James Brown was the first person at his funeral. The first person to show up at his funeral was James Brown. That says it all. Elvis was loved by everybody. His music is loved by everybody. Even if you don't like Elvis, you respect him. That's the point. Yeah, Bob was a poet. True and true and true. Still is. Great guy. But I'm going to close out with that. I just wanted to interject that because I think it's important that you played probably my favorite Elvis song of all time because it actually shows Elvis for who he was. You realize what a person is when they're at their weakest point. You find out what they're made of when they're at their weakest point. You find out why they are who they are when they're at their weakest point. That's when you find out what a man is made of, or what a woman is made of, what a person is made of. When they are at their weakest point, and they become what they are. In that song, Elvis became what he was. He proved who he was. He showed that he is the king of rock and roll, the greatest entertainer that ever lived, the one and the only. And that's why this room is dedicated to Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, and it always will be, no matter what. Elvis is the king, he always will be, and as Elvis would say, there was only one king, and that's Jesus Christ, but in music, in the musical world, there is only one king, and that is Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll.